And we're live. Mark, my brother,
What's up?
good to have you here, man.
Dude, excited to be here.
Yeah, I think, well, for you, it's like I knew of you way before we ever connected. I think I was probably going through a breakup or something. And then I went on the internet and, your videos or some level of your content pops up. And I really and then getting to know you has been awesome. But like who you are to me is you're the person that gives you that direct statement that you need to hear, that's not caught up in the drama, that's not, it's compassionate, it's kind, but it's also the very direct thing that's like not overly emotional, and it's just so effective. And you've just been you cut through the bullshit really quick and give the statement that I think people need to hear in that moment. That's probably why you've become a global human connection expert and, create the love and all the networks that you've built. So testament to you. You've shown up for me in ways that you didn't even know before we had even met. And so here we are now connecting further in this conversation.
Well, beautiful serendipity to be brought into each other's lives, whatever is the reason. And, I've been really honored to be able to partner with you guys. I mean, I love your product. I love what you guys do. And yeah, I think people want, it's like that movie that was called He's Not That Into You. It was just so obvious, some of the things, but when that saying, we can't see the forest when we're in the trees, it's so true. When you're caught up in relational things, you can't really see it because you're trying to see it from within the relationship, within your own wounding, within pain, within fear of abandonment, all the things, all the beliefs and messages we have about relationships, they're all operating in, there's like thousands of algorithms running. And, we just sometimes, we're good at being other people's computer engineers, but not necessarily our own. Someone comes to us with their relational thing and we're like, it's pretty obvious. But then when we're in it, it's not obvious because there's human things going on. And that's what makes being a person in relationship such a beautiful dance, but also paradoxically so painful.
Yes, it is. It's the greatest gift and our greatest suffering all in one.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
What I want to hop into is, so you are this human connection expert. What is that to start? How would you describe that from the source?
Yeah, so the reason I self-titled, which is always great, human connection specialist, because originally my obsession was actually with understanding the ways that humans connect from a business perspective. So I was in sales as my second job, and I loved it. I loved trying to figure out, how do I change people's behavior? How do I get them to buy the thing I'm selling? I worked at a place that was like the Best Buy in Canada. They were actually bought by Best Buy. It was called Future Shop, and it was very much at the time like the 40-year-old virgin. We wore suits, we sold extended warranties. We were kind of your standard, but the sales training was insane. It was really good, somewhat aggressive, but I did my undergrad in finance, which I had no interest in finance. So that shows you the messaging was like, get a job that pays enough money to pay the bills. And so I thought, well, finance can do that. That's what I want to learn how to do. And my favorite classes in university were psychology and marketing and anything that had happened to do with influencing behavior. And it was I got a job as a rep, actually, a pharmaceutical rep. And I liked that. I really, so much of my early 20s was trying to figure out how to manipulate people. I went through a breakup. I was confused. I read The Game. I read books like How to Get Anyone to Do Anything. And then in my late 20s, I was engaged. And I didn't want to be. And I wondered, why I'd been dating this woman for 5 years, incredible woman. And why was I so afraid? Why did I not want to get engaged? And then even though I didn't want to get engaged, why did I get engaged? And so I started to, it felt like a real turning point because I started to look up things like, how do you know if someone's the one? And when I would go to people and say, hey, I'm really scared, I'm really anxious, I just don't feel like this is right, they would say things like, oh, you're a guy, you're just afraid of commitment. And, that, to be honest, really pissed me off because, here we are saying we want sensitive and emotionally aware men. And when I express how I'm feeling, I'm told I don't actually feel that way. And there were a few people who were curious, but it was honestly mostly people who were distanced from my life, like people I didn't know or people who wouldn't be impacted by my decision. And I really realized then that you don't go generally to the people who are closest to you who might be impacted by your choices, because they'll unconsciously usually give you advice that tries to maintain the least amount of disruption in their life. So it was people that I didn't know that really changed my life in that time. I posted my story on this website called The Runaway Bride, which is no longer around, but I posted it in a forum, and all these strangers commented and asked me questions. And it was just so beautiful because they didn't care what I chose. They just care that I found truth. And so actually, it was when I ended that engagement that I became obsessed with studying romantic relationships. I had the blessing of having been working in pharma, so I knew how to read clinical trials and studies, and I loved reading them. I loved trying to understand that science. So I dove deep into that. I went back to school. I studied positive psychology and really wanted to figure out, like, why do some relationships last? Why do others not? Why do some people thrive and others stay and hate each other? Why do we celebrate relational longevity over depth? There were so many things that I felt I'd been lied to my whole life. And I think that so many of our awakenings, or which really I think is beginning to ask questions like, why do I do what I do? Or is there more to this life? Which I think we all meet those moments when we realize that the behaviors we have and the ways that we've been operating are usually systemically taught to us. And so we realize that maybe allopathic medicine didn't work for us, or maybe this breakup, why did I behave this way in a relationship? Why did no one teach me how to relate? So I said human connection because I'm just really obsessed from a business perspective, from a romantic perspective. I just think that so many of the magnifying glasses of our challenges are opportunities to be better people, to really step into our potential, show up the most relationally. But that doesn't mean they can't show up in our relationship to food, or, you know, something happening with our health or drugs. We think of rock bottoms as being, people overdosing or, drinking too much. But rock bottoms really are any time that you're not living from your truth. You're not actually living in your potential. You have awarenesses and you have knowledge, but you're not implementing it. All of that's going to create a rock bottom.
Yeah, I think the rock bottom's like I'm fascinated in the rock bottom place where it's like some people like you sink or you swim, and it can
Right.
become like this transformative time that like the breakups can be the most transformative time, or we just reel and we
Right.
just go off and we like are there common pieces that you see from those that can turn that rock bottom moment into the transformative window, or those that kind of get in the cycle of the actual issue, caught in the pattern and the story of the rock bottom?
Yeah, it's such a great question, because I think we'd all try to emulate whoever that is. But I don't know that we're ready till we're ready. As that saying goes, uh, when the student's ready, the teacher arrives. We can read quote after quote, we can get advice after advice, but till sort of everything lines up, it doesn't just quite hit the same. And I think what makes it hit is usually that it hurts, so much that we have to pay attention. And I think heartbreak is one of those things that I think that love just might matter enough to us that we're willing to change. Like, it's one thing that if we can really feel into the patterns that we keep repeating, all that kind of stuff, we might actually be willing to take a look at ourselves. And I'd say the common thing that is evident in anybody who takes a breakup and transforms their life, takes a health thing and transforms their life, is they take radical responsibility. Their language is different. Like, for example, when I went through a breakup at 19 and, experienced a betrayal from my partner, at that time I blamed her. But, when I was able to process it and step out of the victim mode, which is not to minimize or negate people's experience of being victimized, but to say, when I could take my mindset and switch it and say, how did I get to this place where I was betrayed? Well, evidently, I ended up in a moment where I got betrayed because I betrayed myself so much earlier. Usually external betrayals, cheating, infidelity, lying, breakup, whatever it is, whatever our experience of betrayal is, usually follows a series of self-betrayals. So we just start, creating outcomes in our lives that are reflective of the choices we're making ourselves.
What do you have, like, a rock bottom for yourself of when was it the engagement that you went through, and then kind of what came from there of creating your purpose from a rock bottom?
I'd say that was the first time that I was making this decision that was shaping my life. I got asked 3 questions on that forum, and one of them was, if she left you tomorrow, would you be okay? And my answer was, yeah, I'd be relieved. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that your relationship not being your life, that's not a red flag. But I would have been relieved that she left and I didn't do the leaving. The second one was, could you imagine what your altar would look like, waiting for her? Like, how would you feel? And I was like, oh, I'd feel anxious. And the third question was, could someone else love her better? And that was the one that really hit me, because I thought to myself, I've been so caught up in, is this decision for me? But if it's not for me, it's not for her. Like, someone could love her better, and she was worthy of that. And of course, the follow-up question is, do I want to? And I didn't want to, and I didn't know why. And I also deserved to be in a relationship that I wanted to. And that real shift was powerful for me. That was a rock bottom where I guess I started to see the behaviors that I had and the impact I was having on people and myself. And that I was so afraid of failing that I wasn't actually pursuing what I truly wanted to do with my life, which wouldn't have materialized had I not gone through all of that. And I would say my original rock bottom, though, if I looked back, where behavior change really manifested, was in that 19-year-old self-betrayal, where I ended up so heartbroken. And it was the first time that I really shifted and started to soothe my heartbreak with the bottom of a pint glass, and instead of, I created this story that when I end up in a relationship, I get betrayed. When I love people, they lie to me, they cheat on me, they abandon me, they betray me. And when I let people love me, same thing, I betray myself. And these were all going on unconsciously, but I'd say those were true rock bottoms. But my coping strategy was to dive deeper into the hole, or to do anything but deal with it. It wasn't until that engagement ended that I actually began the journey of taking responsibility for who I was, how I wanted to live, what was integrity to me. And, I'm not going to say it happened, overnight. The layers of awareness came. But I'd say that was probably one of the deepest ones. But now, rock bottoms show up. But I call them that because they're really just invitations to deepen, invitations to step into my integrity and to get aligned, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. When you broke off the engagement, you were saying you weren't in, like, a career that was really fulfilling. Do you think, was it like she wasn't the right match, or was it like the career kind of, I say this more from a man, that, like, your career kind of needs to be a fit, I feel like, before you can really, like, give to a woman. Like, for me, at least, that's, like, it's an important part. I don't think it's a universal truth, but was that the piece that was yearning so big for you to actually be fulfilled and, like, purposeful in what you were working towards?
Yeah, I think it was a culmination of a lot of challenges. I mean, the first part is I did actually really like my work at the time. I was, a specialist rep working in hospitals. I liked it, But as soon as I had that awareness that there was a deeper purpose, because what happened when I went through that engagement ending is I read one of the first books I read was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Oh my God, I'd never thought like maybe I have a bigger purpose. Maybe I'm here for a reason. I'd never thought so existentially. I grew up Catholic, so I sort of rejected God. I rejected Catholicism because I found Catholicism to be quite frank, full of shit and quite manipulative. And so I rejected spirituality. And then it was in this heartbreak, in this loss and not knowing who I was, that I actually started to reconnect to, hey, maybe there's something greater here. Maybe I'm actually meant to do something more. So I'd say it was a culmination of all those things. One, I wasn't actually in my sole purpose. I was in my top purpose: become a good provider, make a certain amount of money, get married by 27, have kids by 30. Those ages have probably gone through inflation as well. But, it's like 35 or whatever it is now. But it's crazy because we're taught that. And so I was starting to pull away from all the things I was taught, trying to figure out who I was underneath the bullshit, underneath all the rules of engagement. So yeah, it began there, and I totally agree with you, like if we're not in our purpose, or at least in integrity, I think that's really it. Like, how can any partner trust us if we're not actually deeply rooted in ourselves? And I'd say that's true no matter the gender, but maybe especially true if the masculine is seen as the anchor in the relationship, in some sense. The anchor to community is usually the partner, to a female partner or someone in their feminine. But yeah, I definitely agree that there's something about being in your purpose that just you're just so passionate about. I mean, it's so contagious when someone's in their purpose. They love what they do. And also allowing our purpose to shift. I think that's the other thing that can be challenging is our identity gets correlated with our purpose, and then it's hard to shift because we have to let that die again, which I'm saying that as a personal experience as well.
100%. We like, for me at least, it's like my purpose becomes, it's like I used to view that as this like life purpose. It's like this never ending
Right.
thing. And I'm kind of committed to it from a way that it's not my purpose anymore. And it's
Right.
like, it'd be like you said, the identity piece. But I think it's important to find that and bring that out. When you left to go, I'm curious to kind of dive into like your business side of
Yeah.
like building Create the Love. So did you stay on as a sales rep after the breakup? And like, when did you kind of transition into, that's a pretty big pivot in life, into how you're going to make your money, the commitment the fulfillment how you're going to impact people. Like, when did that happen after that engagement breakup?
Yeah, so I was like late 27, somewhere around there. I started to feel that call, read those books, started to study relationships, probably in the end of that year of life, and then was researching programs like the UPenn Positive Psychology program. I was just looking up different programs because that was really speaking to my heart. And
What year was this?
oh man, this was in like 2008, 2009, somewhere around
Got
there.
it.
And then I no, I didn't quit because I didn't know what I wanted to do yet. So I kept following the breadcrumbs, following my passion, following what I was also, my friend John Morrow says, if you want to find what you love, find what breaks your heart. And I was really following that, like wanting to learn and uncover this. And then it was I was probably 31. I remember sitting with my friend and she said, what would you do if you do anything? And I said, I'd tour the world and start speaking about relationships. And, I wrote my application for UPenn, didn't get in, and then found another program that I really loved that my friend Louis Aloro ran. And I joined that, went to New York to do that, and very serendipitous, and just kept following the breadcrumbs. And then I was dating this girl, and she was a social media manager. I didn't know anything about Instagram. I wasn't on Instagram. I had Facebook, like every standard person who's Gen X or Gen Z or Gen Z, I don't know, Gen Y and Gen X. So many gens, but just an older gen. And I we broke up, and she was like, "You should start an Instagram." She had said that before. We broke up, and so I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna check out this Instagram thing." And so that was in December of, I think, 2013. And I had already started writing a blog and started writing and coaching and speaking, but I was still working as a rep. And the reason too was that I was able to do stuff with businesses, teach the science of influence, but we'd talk about romantic relational data in that. It was really actually quite an honor, quite an awesome experience. And I used the rep work as an investor in what I wanted to create instead of just quitting it and starting something, from a place where you don't feel safe because you can't pay your rent. I was like, all right, I'm going to pay my rent and build this. And I started that Instagram, and my blog did really well. And
How many blogs were you putting out a week?
I was putting out like one every week and a half, 2 weeks, probably something
Got
like
it.
that. And the first one I ever wrote that really went viral was called "Why You're Not Ready for the Evolved Man You Say You Want." And now I'd take evolved out because that just sounds, hierarchical. But that one just did really well because basically my argument was that people say they want this thing, but when it meets ready to meet them, they don't know how to hold it because they've never held something like that. And I started the Instagram. That started to do really well. And then a year later, I actually left pharma, which was a very scary leap. Yeah, because, I went from, as people call, those types of jobs, golden handcuffs. I couldn't do it anymore, though. My soul was like, you have till this date. And I could tell I'd get sick if I'd have kept going, And I remember my boss, when I gave my notice, she was just an incredible woman, is an incredible woman. She said to me, "Can you just stay till June?" And it was like April 1st. I gave my notice for April 1st. And I was like, no, not a chance. Like there was not a chance I could. And, I remember thinking I better downsize my apartment and get some roommates. And my buddy's like, "Why don't you just make more?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's a different alternative." So you learn as you go. And, you hear people say, just trust and the universe will catch you. And at the time I would have said, "What are you smoking? That sounds great." But now I'd say that's so true. It's a weird thing when you follow your calling, because it usually goes against what we're taught. It's usually something that we don't think we can monetize, or we don't know how to monetize it because it's never been done. But I remember seeing Gary Vee give a talk where he said, "Shit, if you love Smurfs, Smurf it up." Like someone out there loves Smurfs too and is willing to pay to learn about it, and yeah, it's been a serious adventure.
How did you monetize it? Did you start with, the blog sounds like it was step one. Was it speaking engagements? What was kind of your...
A little bit of both. So the blog didn't really generate any income. What it did was generate leads for coaching clients. And then I did speaking, like company consulting things, speaking things. And then I started to do webinars. And then webinars led into courses. And then, that everybody I think is pretty familiar with that world now. And then I think that world is actually shifting a bit now. I feel like things like courses on like a low cost, high volume or whatever volume thing, I feel like that's kind of dying,
I love that I kind of caught this throughout your whole talk. It's like everything that you've done, you like learned and it became a part of this process. Like you talked about when you were a pharma rep, like you learned how to read clinical trials and that became a thing. And I think it's such a testament, like every step, like you took a psychology class and you're like, I love this. Like I love this. But like life, it didn't quite align into like, this is my purpose yet. It was just like you were catching pieces along the way till you, like you said, you hit this rock bottom or you have this moment of like, I want to change the course and to bring that in. I think that's just like it's one of the cool, like it's the most important thing that people were learning along our way. And it's like you were trying, because you were still young in your 20s and you were just trying things out along the way and like picking things up. It wasn't, you thought you were on a path, but you were actually learning all these things along the way. We get so caught up in I'm not my purpose. I don't know what I'm doing. But it's like, as long as we're learning and picking little pieces up and moving towards something, like that will align and that will come together.
Yeah, following those breadcrumbs, like that feeling of elation. I think of the science on flow states. And one of the things they show in flow states, and for people listening, if you're not familiar, a flow state is kind of like when you're doing something and, an hour goes by and it feels like 5 minutes. And, that can be hiking, that can be playing a game, that could be sewing, it could be anything. I think Martin Seligman says it's like being at one with the music. And the research on that shows that when someone's in a flow state, their prefrontal cortex, the part that's in charge of creating a self, goes away. Like it's silent. And I think that's what's so neat about when you're in what you love, is that the self, which is really how we think we are or who we think we need to be, doesn't exist. And so that means we just are. And so much of my own healing and growth through this work, through my work, through what I teach, is continuing to remove the barriers of who I am versus who I think I need to be, versus who will get an applause, versus, my commitment at the very beginning, or maybe it wasn't a commitment, but the purposeful mission, which was very obvious to me at the beginning, was I felt like no one was telling the truth about relationships. And because of that, people were suffering. That they end, that you're not a failure if they end. Like, one thing that I found so fascinating and painful about my engagement ending was that never had I felt more connected to myself, yet never had I felt more judged and being considered a failure. And that was such an interesting paradox to try to hold. I'm seen as a failure and afraid of commitment, yet I'm deeply connected to my heart again. Like, that was weird. But that's when I realized that I've disconnected from my heart for so long in order to not feel that from the external. But what ends up happening is the rejection you are afraid of experiencing outside of you is actually what you live in. You live perpetually in it because you're doing it to yourself. So the pain of not being included in a group obviously is incredibly painful. But gosh, it's temporary. It's temporary because the permanent pain of rejecting your own voice, your own soul, your own intuition, your own passions, your own boundaries, everything, that is something you can't escape if it's your home.
I think that's like ultimately being a leader, because it's like you stick in it. You're dealing with everyone else's, like the judgment you felt was everyone's own projections. They're seeing you through the mirror of, this is my relationship, man. This guy's stepping out of, yours was a relationship. He's stepping out of a relationship that wasn't, whatever the term you want to say, wasn't what you ultimately wanted. But to like step outside of that and take everyone's judgment and still walk forward authentically, like that is, the world's yearning for that. And it's like a testament that that's now become your, like, you stepped out and you probably gave so many people, like, some people stayed in their cycles, but man, look how many people you've given permission to over this time to, like, either level up their relationship and connect further with their partner, or be like, no, this isn't what's best for both of us, and stepping out. And just that one moment, and like if you would have succumbed to everyone's judgment, it's like how many thousands, millions of people that you've now impacted because of that decision. And it just always blows my mind, those ripples of when we actually step up and be a leader or be authentic, whatever. I think authenticity leads to leadership. But like when we do that, that is, it changes trajectory of everyone else around us.
Yeah, we don't know the gift. We don't know the gift that's in it because we're in it. All we feel is the pain. But there was a deeper North Star. I think if I had stayed in that, I would have died. It would have been such a disservice to her too. I think now, if I was, because people say, oh, would you go back? Would you change anything? No, I would never change anything. But what I do know is that I was just terrified of being loved, and she could love me, but I didn't love me. I thought I was unlovable. I thought on a deep level, if I let her actually love me, she would have betrayed me, lied to me, cheated on me, all the things. I hadn't processed that story. It wasn't until I was 35, so, I'd already started everything. And I was talking to this woman named Kelly Marceau, who's just a firecracker. And I just met her and we were talking on a Skype, I think. And she's like, Groves. And I was like, we don't know each other that well. And she was like, have you ever actually let a woman love you? And I was like, oh. And I was like, yeah, of course. And then I got off the call and I was like, oh, wow. Like I've been running from women who could love me for 14 years, since I'd had that betrayal. Even the woman I was engaged to, I never really let her love me. I never let her see me. I let her get a glimpse, but really I had constructed all of my relational behaviors around being able to control the depth of vulnerability and intimacy to a place that I knew I could tolerate, but I can remember a woman more than once saying, I'm really starting to like you. And I'd be like, oh, like, like I got to run from this. And that became just more of the deeper work was receiving. But, to just reiterate your point, you don't know the ripple that healing can do. You don't know the ripple that alignment can do, because it might be about relationship, but it also might be just about leaving your job. It might be about stepping into your purpose. It might be about asking for a raise. It doesn't, I think a lot of people misinterpret that it's always about leaving things. That's sometimes the answer, but really it's about inviting everything to level up with you. And if it can't hold it, then it falls away. Inevitably, you don't even have to leave it. But I'll get sometimes messages from people saying, my partner left me because of you. And I'm like, well, first off, I never tell anyone to leave anybody. And second, here's the problem. Like, they're not leaving because of me. They're leaving because of you. But you want to blame me. But I've had people say, can you post this thing because my partner reads your stuff so that they decide to stay? And I was like, listen, no matter what I post, they're going to read it through the lens of what they want to find. So I could say, love people all out. And to someone who wants to leave, they'll read that as reasoning to leave. To someone who wants to stay, they'll see that as reasoning to stay. Like that just shows you how when we're not willing to look at our own shit, like relationships give us feedback. They say, they're not working. It's because something we're doing is not working, or we're orienting in a pattern that's not functional. And so everything is an invitation to grow or change or become better or have boundaries or, just to continue to become.
Yeah, I think for the relationships, whether in a partnership or not a partnership, they're each going to show some new side to us that we wouldn't get access to. Whether like when I'm single, like I'm in a relationship now, and it's like there are parts of me single that I just don't get to see that part of myself right now. Like It's just and then in a relationship, it's like there's a depth that gets to be seen. In a relationship, it feels a lot more confronting to me into like who I am and like I don't think I naturally fit. This is my story, but like relationships are more challenging for me. But I have a partner that I love so much more that I want to be with her. But it is a real my natural state. It's like intimacy can be challenging for me. Like it's like you said, like there's times where it's like, oh, I'm keeping a distance for some reason that I don't know. Like it just is a natural resistance there. As opposed to like when I'm single, it's like a calm. There's like a level of calm that's like when I'm single, but I think it's because it's like there's a depth that I don't have to go into. Mm-hmm. Like it's mm-hmm. And they're both unique states, but yeah, I think being in a relationship, there is a level of, intimacy is like there's a lot of growth in that, a lot of challenge in that.
Yeah, absolutely. You think about when someone's single, what the work really is how do you learn to love your aloneness? Loneliness, which shows up obviously inevitably for people who are single, is this misconception that someone else is going to give you something that you can only find in yourself. And that's kind of the mission of loneliness, is to have us long for something only to realize that we're really longing for us, which is not to say we can't desire a relationship. It's just, where does the desire come from? I think of what lives in intimacy is, of course, exposure, risk, all of that kind of stuff. And it's, for people who are more anxiously attached, like people who tend to chase, tend to, get really anxious, wondering where they fit in people's lives, all that kind of stuff. Someone might also code that as codependence. Someone also might identify as being an empath. They just all tend to be a cluster of behaviors. They have a hard time self-regulating. So like sitting in their own experience and regulating their own emotions. And so they go to another person to get regulation. They text the person to feel regulated. Get the text back, oof, nervous system's calm. But that means the nervous system always requires an other in order to feel safe. People who are avoidant tend to have a harder time co-regulating. They sort of operate life more as an island. And so when they get close to people, it can be more challenging for their nervous system to regulate with another person. So, we're all learning how to lean into both these things because, of course, being single, I always got my poop in a group, but you get into a relationship and all of a sudden you've got someone else's needs, someone else's goals, someone else's dreams. I have a friend, an employee who recently said to me, listen, Mark, like, I just need you to always know that no matter what decision you make for the business, I'm always free. Like, I'm always free to leave and do my thing. And I thought, isn't that so magical? Like, what a liberating experience that is to just know, like, this person would be emotionally good. And I think what's really fascinating about romantic relationships is we consider it sort of romantic to say, I would die without you, But one of the things that I've learned that is true for me, and it might not be true for other people, is that my relationship with my fiance is not a prison. Like if it is in her highest interest and in the interest of her soul to go somewhere else, to do something else, I would be hurt and it would be painful, but I would ultimately want that for her. And I think that's a different way to operate. Like when we think we have to be somewhere because we made a commitment, then it's not a choice anymore. As opposed to acknowledging, like, this is just true. Anyone can leave a relationship at any time. That's just a fact. It's not, you can't be argued with. What a beautiful thing to acknowledge. Because that means every time someone chooses to stay or chooses to be or chooses to love, out of all the people in the world they could choose, they're choosing this person, you. And I mean, when we actually sit with the significance of that, then now we're actually liberated. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's such a different way to operate. And it took me a while to get there, to realize like, wow, that's true commitment. Like that.
Yeah, it's a different concept of commitment as opposed to like in the physical of a commitment.
Right.
Like we will be in physical relation with each other as opposed to like actual love commitment. And that can be in so many forms.
Right.
So many different ways.
Right. And that we're like committed to the truth and to our soul alignment first. Because the majority of relationships are afraid of breaking up. And because they're afraid of breaking up, they don't have the conversations that might break them up or create delicacy. But those are actually the conversations that deepen the relationship. That's the irony. It's like in the fear of losing something, we tend to cling to it tighter and avoid anything that might lose it. Generally because our own identity is tied up in our relationship being successful. We can blame society for that. But like if your worth lives in your relationship status, then you'll never want your relationship status to change. And you'll also want to find people so that your relationship status is, I'm in a relationship. But if it's not tied to that, if it's just tied to being committed to the truth and committed to each other's soul expansion, then you can grow together. And if at some point you can't, it'll be in service of both of you. Like that, like if a relationship's not for you, it's not for them, and vice versa. Like one of the things that people don't get is like, if you're chasing someone who's unavailable or doesn't want what you want, the first qualifier of someone being your person is they want to be your person. That should just be so simple, but it's not. And that's when we know wounding is sort of at play.
I had when my ex and I broke up, she let she let me go. And it was like one of the greatest like forms of love that I've felt, like for her to like allow that. And I think, you know, maybe her wanting to stay in the relationship, but she loved me that much where she let that happen. And it was
That's
truly,
powerful.
yeah, it's something that, you know, it's a gift. And so I know exactly what you mean. And like when it doesn't work for one, it doesn't work for the other. But that's like a damn hard, you know, you really have to stand for that. And like it takes you outside of yourself. You start to actually see the other person. And it's not as, yes, you're looking for yourself, but you're caring for the other person by taking that action.
It's so powerful because you think like in that moment, which I experienced when Kylie and I broke up and then reunited. But when we broke up, it was truly the experience of unconditional love, like truly the experience of grace, you know, to be touched by grace, to be touched by permission to have humanness, to like go a different way and still love each other. Like, I think that is one of the most profound experiences as a person is, can this ending actually be a bridge to whatever our lives are going to be, separate or together? But can it hold the pain of the ending and all the possibilities? You know, and I think that most of the time, I remember hearing this quote from my friend Yoda, who's a chef, and she was saying that
Yoda,
yeah,
epic.
what a great name, I know, right? Which means she has to say epic things, and she did. She was saying that we should leave our relationship as we leave a house, like preparing it for the next people. And that's such a different way of thinking, especially I think as men, but maybe that's true if I can't speak for women. Is like, we're like, fuck that. Like, I'm not, some other dude's gonna get up in here, you know? Like, that is thinking so possessively and so like we haven't processed the loss and that we actually truly want what's best for our partners, our exes, you know, whatever it might be. You know, I think about business partnerships. Imagine if business partnerships existed with this space of like, if this ever needs to depart, we're going to do that with love. I mean, then you're not in a prison of a partnership, which is, of course, one of the most challenging parts of being in business with someone else, is that it can become very codependent. Just like any relationship can become codependent. And, you know, if someone else is protecting me from feeling feelings of loss by staying, then they're actually doing me a disservice. And I think when we know the value of grief or of any emotion, we don't try to rob people from feeling those feelings or save them from it.
What's your, just curious, kind of popped up, what's your like feeling on marriage, like in the common form of it? Do you have thoughts on like, because it comes from a question for myself, because I've never really known how I've had different opinions on it.
Yeah.
Into like till death do us part. Like that's always been it's never just sat with me. And like some, I find beauty in it that they do stick to death do us part and they're in it and I acknowledge it. And then for me, that's never like actually like really been in resonance of like, like life changes all the time and I don't want to be a victim to circumstances and, you know, but like I can't commit till death. Like I don't know what is in store. And so curious your thoughts on that.
Oh man, I think it's such a beautiful question because it really, there's so many wonderful layers to this. I think the first part is I'll hear people say, which this was me as soon as my engagement ended, I remember thinking like, marriage is such bullshit. Like it doesn't make sense. Humans are not monogamous. You know, all those things. I read Sex at Dawn, and anyone who has danced in the polyamory world, that's kind of like the Bible. And I realized, you know, I just didn't agree with the definition of marriage that was being handed to me. You know, when someone says I don't believe in marriage, I just say to them, redefine it. You know, because what we inevitably do, you know, you think if I say the word tree, you might think of a Douglas fir. I might think of a spruce. I might think of a poplar. You know, like words are agreed upon definitions. And so when someone says marriage and someone says, ugh, you know, really we can go, well, what is a relationship that feels right for you? Define it that way. You know, and in doing that, you take ownership and responsibility for the type of relationship you'd want to create. So many people don't want to get married because they don't want to get divorced. But the problem with divorce is not marriage. The problem with divorce is dysfunctional or challenging or whatever relationships. I don't want to make a judgment on it. But what leads to them is misalignment or, things that aren't working out. And we really need to look at the relational structure we do. Now, I think this is an interesting balance because from a biological level, one of the things that we're constantly doing in relationship is saying, if I needed you, would you be here for me? And if our commitment to one another is, maybe not, then on a, nervous system level, we're not going to feel like we can really depend on our partners. And so knowing that, like even knowing that in companies, one of the greatest predictors of corporate culture health is the question, am I free to be who I need to be? Am I psychologically safe to express myself? So if we're on eggshells thinking our relationship might end, that's one thing. But if we also think I have to be here no matter what, I'd say that was a large part of the failures of our previous relational inheritance, like what we've inherited. Like you couldn't get divorced for no fault till like the late 60s. I'm not sure the specific laws in the US, but they were very similar to Canada. And then before then, a governing body had to approve your divorce. So a group of old, generally white guys sat in a room and decided, which that's crazy. Not to mention you'd experience total exile from your community, especially if it was a religious-based community. So you think of the cost was so high. So I think when commitment comes from a different place, commitment to ourselves, commitment to each other's growth, commitment to you expressing yourself as your highest expression. Like I'm committed to that in our connection. Like that's a commitment I make in friendships. That's a commitment I make is like, I'm here to be a reflection of your potential. And if in any way I hold you back from that, then we need to discuss it or, because really compromise and how it differs from self-abandonment is that compromise, although we might experience disappointment, we know that the relationship is expanded. If that makes sense. Self-abandonment doesn't feel that way, and I interviewed Aubrey Marcus recently, and he was sharing a quote that he loved from Jordan Peterson. So I'm like quoting someone who quoted someone. And regardless of your views on Jordan Peterson, the quote is actually really beautiful, which is, commitment only works when you do it. And I actually do think there's something really deeply profound about a commitment that actually comes from an embodied, intentional place. Like if you operate every morning knowing you have no out, obviously on a conscious level, you still know, like if I die or they die or, this happens or that, we'll have to navigate it then. But that's going to the future. But imagine if in every present moment we woke up with this commitment. What would it demand of us? Who would we be? How would we grow? And I think there is something deeply profound about that. So I've been really considering that more lately.
Me too. I've been thinking a lot because there's something I watch, I observe the relationships that's just ingrained, that it's like, we're in this. And they just kind of ride that out. And it's like, there's almost a freedom in that. Like it's off the table, like we're here for each other.
Right.
And it's like my partner and I, Raya, it's like we took a huge step when our arguments, our back door, which is kind of our nature to be like, there's a back door.
Right.
Like we took that off the table.
Beautiful.
And we never made verbal threats with that. That was gone. Like, and we could actually go through a disagreement.
Right.
We could have hurt feelings and we could, like it created a depth in our relationship that, we broke up, got back together, and it's like, we are in this relationship. So it's like I'm at this current spot of that where it feels like the daily commitment. And there's this like, is there a spot you can get to where it's just like, there's no daily, it's just like you're in it until the end. And I don't know.
Like it's sort of infinite in some way. Yeah. I mean, with Kylie, there is I don't have an exit. First off, I don't think there's an upgrade. So that's good. I don't think there's an upgrade. And, one of the things that the Gottmans talk about in their research on marriage is that as soon as you start thinking about an imagined or real alternative is really a bad path to go on because it disconnects you from your partnership. I think it's natural for humans to desire other people and to obviously experience connection with other people. But we do get to decide where our energy goes. We do get to decide, you might have a fleeting experience of attraction, but we get to decide if we want to feed that, and we might catch ourselves sabotaging our connections through doing that. So this isn't about numbing ourselves from desire. It's about redirecting it. It's kind of like in the book Think and Grow Rich from, I forget his name, which I'm sure someone listening is like yelling it out right now. But
Classic.
yeah, in it, he talks about sexual transmutation, like transmuting sexual energy into creativity. And I think what a container that could be with partnership. But again, it requires that both of us are committed to certain agreements. Like most of us don't actually explicitly express what agreements we have relationally, and for Kylie and I, our agreements are to individual growth, to individual expansion, and to also reflecting possibility for each other. Like I want our relationship to be a vehicle to her dreams, to like what she wants to create with her life. And I also want it to be a vehicle to mine. I never saw in my younger relationships, probably not till I was like 31, definitely not until I was 31 or 32, did I even start to consider that my partner's feedback was an invitation to my own personal expansion. I was so busy being defensive and trying to defend my enoughness, which wasn't there, that I couldn't hear that they were really saying, oh my God, you have so much possibility. Here's a window. Here's where you could grow. Ugh, man, I never knew how to do that. And now, which I'm not saying I always receive it with grace with Kai, but when I can sit and really process it, I do see that she's always providing that.
That's such a gift when you have someone that is that invested in your life. And it's like, yeah, and I'm like with you, I don't receive it with grace all the time and get defensive and frustrated and label it. But it's so special to have someone that's got that viewpoint on your life that can give you that real-time feedback, that real-time support, different viewpoint that actually Raya knows my life more than anyone. It's like we live together. That's a huge thing. Like we spend so much time together, and it's like to have that. And it's cool that you said it like that. I hadn't always viewed it like that, but it's like, man, I got like a person that's like got a vantage point that's probably clearer than anyone else. Right. And like when that's coming through, like, it's probably why it's the hardest to see the hardest to receive sometimes, because it's the shit that actually needs to get some movement, or actually it's like, things that I'm kind of stuck in or stubborn about. But it's a good reminder right there.
I think that's such a beautiful part of connection is when we can trust someone else's words. But that's the growth. That's some of the hardest growth. And making sure we're aligned, and what are our intentions for this relationship. Ram Dass talks about how love and relationships are just vehicles for liberation. And I really agree with that. Like what Kylie reflects to me is where I'm stuck, where I'm still in paradigms of identity, where I have limiting beliefs, and what a thing to think like we're both going to bump up against each other to liberate one another. And then our relationship becomes the place of liberation where we can be ourselves, when we can grow, where we are kind of this safe container that gets to reflect on sort of the silliness of the world. And I don't know. I think that's less rare these days. I think people really crave that. There's a lot of conversation about how people don't take love seriously these days, blah, blah, all these beliefs. And I'm like, are you kidding me? People care so much. I've never seen men are doing incredibly deep work. And, I think there's a real, if we look to confirm what we believe, and, I just keep seeing confirmation of just humanity's desire to create on such a different level. And the truth is when you get liberated in relationship, you'll liberate yourself in everything, the paradigms of everything you've been taught that is actually bullshit.
In a personal level, so you and Kylie separated. Was that like a done deal, and then you guys, like, fate kind of brought you back together, or what?
Yeah, man, it was over. We were together 5 years, 5 and a bit, and we tried everything. We just couldn't make it work. It just wasn't working, and it was one of the hardest things we've ever done. To love someone on such a deep level, but know that in the container, the way it was, it just wasn't in service to either of us. And we did a closing ceremony. I mean, we closed the relationship, and I was really moving forward. I didn't. There was a possibility of a future with her, but it wasn't the way we both were. And I wasn't actually putting energy into that. I was putting energy into myself. She was putting energy into herself. And, it was about, we didn't talk we had no contact for 3 months. Then we came back together, spoke, wasn't good alignment. Again, went no contact. And we were both living our lives. And then we broke up in September. And then about like 8 months later, we had coffee, and she was like, I want to try this again. And one of the things that was a wound I had from previous relationships was that the person doesn't choose me. Like, they don't pick me fully. And in the first 1.0 of our relationship, that was true. She didn't choose me fully. She wasn't capable of, and I don't mean that from a martyr space. I mean, like, what lived in the ether of our connection was that she had this dream that she had to leave. And so this was always haunting her, this dream that she had to leave the relationship one day. And she didn't know how to, like, reconcile it. She wanted to stay. She wanted to let this dream go. She wanted to let all that go. So you got to imagine, like, that's living in the unconscious of my mind too, is she had this dream that she might leave me one day. I couldn't have lived in a more perpetual wound of she doesn't choose me. Like, seriously, it was like 98.7% chosen, but there's still this thing operating. And so at one point, I was just like, listen, this is the story I want to create in my life and in relationship. And if you don't want to create it, that's totally okay. I still love you, but I'm not abandoning this story of wanting to have kids and doing it in this timeline. I've been clear with you since the beginning. And it was when we ended that we truly felt like we were able to, when we came back together, explore the hooks that we had, the previous wounding, how that showed up in our relationship. We call that space now the sacred pause. Well, she called it that. That's the graceful space, the way of her naming it. But yeah, it was, the coming back together wasn't planned. And I always think of an Abraham Hicks audio that she talks about how when your person shows up, you won't care what their name is. You won't be obsessed about an ex. You'll just feel it energetically. And, that was true. It was challenging, of course, coming back together because you have to navigate all the previous pains from the previous relationship. And one thing she kept saying to me when we came back together is, I'm not going anywhere. Like, I choose you. And it was different. It was like embodied. It was true. And the really wounded part of me, it was like, it was speaking to everything I needed to hear early in the reconciliation and the coming back together. And you don't really realize you need to hear it till you hear it, and it sort of calms a part of you. And there was also a part of me that didn't trust her in her saying that. I didn't believe her. And so I communicated that with her. I don't believe you. I hear you and I love what you're saying, but there's still a part of me that's like, I'm not sure. And so we honored that, and it took time to rebuild trust, or to build trust in that space. And here we are now.
Yeah, it's really important to say those. Thanks for sharing that, man. That was really, really special to kind of hear the union of you guys coming back together. And it's like you were honest in that moment. Like, it seems like you were breaking your own patterns, like to actually state like, I don't trust you. And that doesn't make you bad. That doesn't make me, like, it's just, this is what is. To actually have that in the open and work through that. It's
Yeah, our commitment
beautiful.
was to truth above everything. Like, if we're not a good match, that's the truth on. Like, if this isn't working, that's the truth. How do we negotiate it? How do we navigate this? If we can't, it was like always about truth first.
How do you find truth?
Just calling out the realities of our circumstances, pointing to what is real for us. So, like, the truth that I didn't trust what she was saying. A lot of the times we wouldn't say that because we wouldn't want to ruin the moment, or we wouldn't want to, say this thing that might cause them to get upset or not feel. But it was like we just made this commitment that we had to say the things that were truly going on in our heart, and the truth that we weren't sure if it was going to work. I mean, that was true. But to actually put it out there allowed it to be labeled, and then we could navigate it. It wasn't this thing hiding in the ether. It was just like, oh, this is the reality of human connection. This is the reality of the dance. So, I think it's at least the pursuit of truth is to label the things we're feeling, label the things that are coming up. Because, of course, emotions are real that we're experiencing, but they're not always rational. And someone might argue, well, the emotion is rational through the lens of your wounding. Yes, true. But our wounding often creates emotions that are sometimes exaggerated response to circumstances. But it's only through the labeling of these things that we're able to heal them, to bring them out into the forefront of the connection, to say, I normally run here, or when you tell me that you love me, I shut down. I can really feel my body close. When I say I love you, I can feel you shut down. Like, just starting to claim all these intuitive feelings that we have, it brings them to the surface so that we can go, oh yeah, here's what's real. And we're often so afraid of saying these things because we're afraid of hurting people's feelings. We're afraid of things not working out. But then we're not in service of love. We're in service of fear. And, I don't think any of us do this perfectly. That's not the point. But the point...
There's a lot of faith in that, because it's like you're talking about saying the truth, but to say truthful things with someone that matters, it's like trust. Usually you want to have trust that they're going to like stick around or they're going to like receive it. But trust, a lot of times, actually, we might say I trust everyone, but that comes with time. We develop that through, and so there's a faith that's like, okay, I'm going to say the truthful thing. And, time might not have had a depth in the relationship yet, but I have faith and trust that we're going to do this. And some work and some don't. And that's what makes a relationship super magical, when it can kind of like, I've had so many relationships that's attempted from both sides, where I didn't receive it and I left, or I said the thing and the other person left, and it just didn't, for whatever reason, it just, that didn't a thing. And then there's the moment that for some reason, like, we are willing to trust each other, like have that faith with each other and say the truthful thing. And I stuck around and you stuck around, and we just keep kind of going deeper into this whole experience and creating some unique thing. And each relationship's its own little magical, elixir that gets created. But yeah, it's paradoxical when you say it like that.
Well, and to think, if I say the truth and you leave, then that's in service of the truth.
Fair.
Because if I tell you something that's real, that's going on for me, or is evident in the relationship, and someone leaves, then the container of the relationship couldn't hold the truth. And then we're both invited to level up. I'm invited to stay at or increase my level of capacity for being honest, and the other person is too. And we either decide to do that together or we don't. But what I find inevitably is you end up continuing to move towards or becoming people that can keep being in service of it. If a relationship is created from the space of wearing masks and pretending you like shit you don't like and avoiding hard conversations, then when hard conversations are presented, the relationship itself is invited to change to be one that can hold hard conversations. And so it continuously is being invited to evolve. You sort of think of it like a relationship is a separate entity. There's you and there's your partner, and they're both entities, and the relationship is a third entity. And it's sort of a container that holds both, And whenever we do something, we're inviting it to hold bigger versions of us. As we grow and change over the years, the relationship has to grow and change too. And I think of my friend Alexandra Salman, who's a therapist. She says that, over a lifetime, you'll be married many times, often to the same person, but not always. And I love that. It like invites this continued space for us to have different iterations of ourselves, but if the relationship is founded based on the founding identities we have, then we won't even allow our identity to shift or what we believe to shift or what we value to shift because it'll threaten the relationship.
Man, this is I could rap with you all day. Sure, this is what you talk about all day. But one quote that I did that inspired, like, was really intriguing to me was what you said: the greatest predictor of our health is not blood, like our cholesterol, our blood pressure, but the predictor of our health at 80, but the relationships we had at 50. Mm-hmm. Will you expand on that a little?
Yeah, so that's from the Harvard Well-Being Study, which used to be called the Harvard Men's Study. And that's the longest running study ever on well-being. And what they did was they studied Harvard graduates, and they compared them to people from lower socioeconomic spaces, which obviously makes sense, because what they were trying to see is if you come from wealth or you go to Harvard, how does that correlate to health outcomes? And what they saw was that the greatest predictor of your health was not the amount of money you had or where you come from. Those obviously influence access to health and things like that, and access to nutritious foods. But they also wanted to see, how does that participate in the confounding nature of our outcomes? And what they saw was that the greatest predictor of your health at 80 was the quality of your relationships at 50. And that was relationships of all type. That didn't have to just be romantic. Because community, the way that we're received in community, the way that we relate, how we handle conflict, all of that is very predictive of the inflammatory state that our bodies are in. And what they also saw is that the relationships that were healthy actually had quite a protective effect in terms of like dementia and pain, the experience of pain. And if you think about it on just like some of the other research, like the Gottmans have a study where they look at couples who are in high conflict relationships, and then they just measure their physiological responses when they're sitting beside each other. They're not arguing, but their bodies are actually in a state as if they're sitting beside a literal threat, like a tiger. And that has always had a really profound impact on me because it's shown the importance of actually learning how to regulate. And, I say this to you all the time, from like one of the greatest ways to train regulation for me has been the cold plunge, and because it allows you to listen to your body, which is saying, I'm going to die, but your body's not going to die. You're actually incredibly safe. And so you're able to observe your response, but then choose your response as opposed to react. And so it just builds more capacity and more space between stimulus and reactivity or response. And that really changes our life, which is a quote from Viktor Frankl about that space between. The other study that looked at people in high conflict relationships showed that people who were in the higher conflict relationships had more leaky gut, so which is of course a sign of inflammation. And another one looking at people again marked as having high conflict relationships, they gave them a little puncture on their arm, and the people in high conflict relationships actually healed slower, where it was like 3 days for people in healthy relationships. It was like 4 or 5 days for people in unhealthy relationships. And so it just shows you the impact these things have on our bodies, and why this work is so important. Like, it's so important because, on some level, our longevity, the quality of our life, and the quality of our health all depend on our ability to be in really healthy relationships.
I mean, from that front, it's like you're a true doctor. You're giving people health. Like you're the medicine. You are the medicine, my man.
I'll say that next time I meet an MD. Actually.
Exactly.
But it shows you how much that, from a functional medicine perspective, you think holistically when a physician or a healthcare provider really takes the time, if they have the time because they're being paid differently, to be able to actually sit with us and get our history, understand our families, understand our relationships. Because you think the impact of a divorce, a high conflict divorce, the impact of just dysfunction, I mean, it's so painful on our bodies, so incredibly.
What is something that you believe that's not commonly accepted?
That's a great question. Well, initially, I would say it was that not every relationship is meant to last forever, and that if it does end, you're not a failure. I think some of the most profound things I've seen are people who leave. That's some of the most inspirational things. So I'd say that was probably my first. I remember saying it at a talk, and people in the front row being like, "What the fuck is this guy saying?" Because of course, people come to learn about relationship to hopefully make their relationship last forever. But my work has never been about making people last. It's about people becoming liberated individually. And if that serves the relationship, which it always does, then great. And if it means it ends, then, that can be an awful experience, obviously, for people. But really, it's always about people getting to know themselves and coming home to themselves. Gosh, and conflicting truth now. Oh man, that's probably a big can of worms, but I'd say that I really believe that we've experienced a large amount of trauma in the last 2 years, and that trauma has led to a lot of fear, and that fear has led us to be more divided than ever and to cling more to our identities. And, I really feel like I'm Canadian, so I can at least speak from my Canadian experience. I feel like we've been really influenced to take on this solution is one way to treat one thing, and we haven't even considered risk stratification and risk benefit and all that kind of stuff. And it's just been painful to watch the psychological manipulation in marketing that has happened in the last 2.5 years that has really divided families and communities and relationships, and that's been hard to watch. And that I don't think is a widely accepted truth, although I think it's becoming more widely accepted.
Totally. I mean, from your end, it's like, it's what you do is connection. And you've seen over the last 2 years, we've gone, like just that quote earlier, it's like, what is the greatest, indicator of our health is the quality of our relationships. And we just put a fork right through that. And we just said, let's go a different route. This is the path. And, the symptoms that we're seeing now in society, it's like, it shouldn't be surprising. We are connective beings. This is what we need. It's like ultimately like that has to hold. That is the foundation. And then we have to work around that. But we took that away. And from your side, I could see how that has probably been very challenging. I mean, it's been challenging for me. And if that's your profession, it's something you know so deeply about.
Man, it's been hard to witness. And I think from a health perspective, having come from the allopathic medicine space and then, observed pharma and marketing and been very much a large part of it, to then watch how the same thing has really occurred, the marketing, and, I look at it and I'm like, man, we've denied natural immunity. We've denied how to improve immune function outside of just one treatment. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. I saw people get canceled for talking about vitamin D, for talking about gut health, also not dealing with, if we had put the same amount of marketing and public health money into promoting healthy lifestyles and healthy eating and access to good food, growing our own food, reducing people's body weight instead of increasing it through lockdowns and trauma and fear. I mean, I think we would have seen different outcomes. And, I hope that we can all move towards repairing with each other and really seeing that the political divide that's occurred is intentional. Like if we lost a family member because of their political view, then, and I get that can be correlated. What we do is we correlate political views to values. We're actually not getting to know what appealed to them in whatever person they're voting for, because of course people are so against someone else's perspective. There's a theory in politics called horseshoe theory, which is really that both ends become the same. And I think we've really seen that. And so I think it's to step into curiosity to understand why people choose what they choose. Gosh, that bridge to the future is everything. Can we do that in our relationships? Can we do that in our families? But I think there's a lot of hurt there, and it needs to be explored.
I agree. Well, I appreciate you coming in and dropping in with me and spending some time, and really love this conversation, man.
Thanks so much for having me, and I can't wait to have you on mine, brother.
It'll be fun. Where can people find you? What are you up to these days?
Yeah. Okay. Well, you can I have courses on boundaries, dating, breakups to help you navigate through a breakup and turn it into that expansive experience. They're all at createthelove.com. I have an Instagram, Create the Love. You can kind of find me everywhere. I have a podcast, Mark Groves Podcast. And then I also have an Instagram called It's Mark Groves, where I talk more about the psychological circumstances and stuff that has occurred in the last couple of years.
Awesome. Go check him out, folks. He showed up for me at certain times in my life, and he'll show up for you. So appreciate you, man.
Appreciate you.
Love you, brother.
Love you too.
And have a beautiful day.
Thanks, you too.